Aloha, and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books from the shelf, dust them off, and remind ourselves why we love them. My name's Tom Galley, and joining me today is Tony Pasculi.
Thanks, Tom.
And today we're going to read, or talk about rather, Logan's Run by William Nolan, one of my favorites from late grade school, early high school.
So that's a big difference, late grade school, early high school. I would guess early high school based on this is a little sophisticated for grade school.
I'm going to go the other way, it's late grade school, almost certainly.
Interesting.
So we've talked more than once about the fact that parents don't tend to understand what science, or at least, our parents didn't tend to understand what science fiction was. It wasn't just robots and ray guns. The second book of this got taken away from me. I left it lying around in the living room where I was reading, and Dad picked it up, and they decided it was definitely too much for somebody my age, and they would give it back to me later in life, which they did when I turned 17 and had completely forgotten that the book even existed. They did give it back to me.
That's a little late.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad they picked up that one instead of Logan's Run, because, the graphic content in Logan's Run was definitely much more than in the second book. So if they took the second book away from me, I can't imagine what the reaction would have been to the first one.
I don't think my parents ever took a book away from me, but they never bothered to read anything I was reading. That's if they had, oh my God, they would have flipped their lids when they read Hellstrom's Hive.
But, it never occurred to me that I was doing anything wrong reading one of these books.
Yeah.
When I maintain I wasn't. And I was just, I left it in one of the spots that I would sit and read. Just random chance that a parent happened to pick it up. Maybe the cover art was lurid enough to get their attention.
I can see that. That. Because this is a book, well, it's not of the 70s, it's of the 60s.
Yeah.
And it had that kind of cover art going on.
Yeah, and again, we've got that sci-fi author obsessed with sex.
Yes.
There are 3 or 4, they're not explicit like in terms of description, but you've got the scene in the glass house. Mm-hmm. And that is just, this is an entire building made out of completely transparent walls, ceiling, furniture, in which you go and you have sex, and the rooms illuminate at random so you can watch the people around you having sex.
Yes.
Yeah, there's nothing obsessed with sex about this.
In the future, science fiction authors will be able to get laid. That's what they write about. Yeah,
I think so.
So, why is this a favorite?
It was a favorite long before I ever saw the movie. Because, seeing an R-rated movie is harder when you're 12 than reading an R-rated book might be.
Was it R-rated?
I don't even remember if that movie was R-rated. It might not have been. But it was such a fun idea. It was a post-apocalyptic book without an apocalypse. Not that I necessarily thought about it in those terms, right? But it was a completely rebuilt world where you could do pretty much anything you wanted to for 21 years.
Yeah.
Well, 14 years anyway. And then the movie came along, which had some things in common with the book.
Not much.
Not much, but coolest movie prop ever made is the Sandman gun.
Really?
Do you remember the gun?
I haven't seen the movie since it came out, which is in 1976.
It was a relatively featureless black handle with a black barrel, but when they pulled the trigger, it fired jets of flame, 4 jets of flame, as if there were a muzzle brake on the end and something coming out with phenomenal power. And of course, this being the 70s or the 80s when they made it, it was flame. There's a compressed propane cylinder in there they would pull. There was a sparker, and it shot flames out. I still would really like to have one of those.
So you mentioned that this is a neat idea, and I think that's one of the things the book has going for. It's very high concept.
Yes.
And I think that's why it lent itself obviously to a movie, and why the movie has so little to do with the book. Because like a lot of science fiction books at the time, it is, and this is one of the things I appreciated, it is dense with ideas. They're just throwing shit in there all over the place. It's like Harry Potter, where like every other page is like some kind of magical bean or something, There's a relive center where you can relive your memories. So there's microwire weapons where you can cut somebody, And I don't think any of that makes it into the movie.
No, and in the movie, they live in domed cities because they believe the outside is hostile. And in the book, the entire planet is covered in subway cars. And you can literally jet to a different continent in a few minutes. So, hey, you want to go to Africa and go on safari? You jump in a May's car, you go to Africa, and hey, there you are. You're ready to go on safari. People travel the world easily, quickly. It's almost like Star Wars in the way that it moves around.
That was really messing with my head as I was reading this, because I never read the book until this is my first time encountering the book. I literally, until you suggested it, didn't even know there was a book. I thought they just made a movie. And the movie is not great, but it's iconic, and it's very much lodged in my head from all the way back in 1976. And every time I was reading this and getting into a maze car and zipping off somewhere, it's just like, this is so wrong. They should be outside a dome. They should be in the wasteland. There is no wasteland.
There is no wasteland. Yeah. No, there's outside. People go outside all the time,
Yeah, they kept crossing paths with civilization. It just felt, it's so alien to the movie. Yeah. So
now the Sandmen in this, all right, these are the, I don't know, they're the evil police, right?
Yes.
The Gestapo almost. They exist to put such a fear in the population that voluntarily going to sleep for, when you're 21 years old, voluntarily suiciding is preferable to trying to run away. And to do this, they have crafted a weapon that is just horrific. Yeah. The Homer, it's a projectile fired from a gun that burns out your nerves. It traces your nervous system, burning out the nerves as it goes.
Yes.
It's designed to be as painful a death as they could possibly engineer. So people live in terror, I think justly so, of that.
Yeah, that's pretty appalling. It's weird. It's the whole time I'm reading this book, I was thinking of another book and another movie. I'm sure you've seen Soylent Green at some point in your life. So these both are books about overpopulation crises. And in Logan's Run, they solve the overpopulation crisis. They have a war where the young people revolt. They kill off all the old people. And it's like, okay, now to maintain our even population, we're going to kill everybody when they turn 21.
Yep. And then they put a computer in charge of it.
Yes.
And then all the people who know how to make the computer run end up being over 21. And there we go. We end up with a self-fulfilling fantasy, or a self-propagating society there. And this happens in the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Thinker was made, I'm trying to remember, they laid down the foundations for the Thinker in the 70s. And I thought this was fantastically cool because Nolan did not have to foresee the future of computing at all. Yeah. He's like, it is now, I'm writing this in the 70s. What would a computer that could run the world look like? It would stretch for miles. We'll put it in the caverns I'm going to make up under Mount Crazy Horse. It will stretch for miles. And it will be solid state and blinky lights and clicky circuits. And this will work because in the future, people will look back at computing in the 1970s.
Yeah.
He thought that one through.
Yeah, that's good. We were just a few years past the transistor at this point when this book is written. It was crazy. Yeah. So one of the things that struck me by analogy with Soylent Green is that they don't, first, there's no calendars. Like, people are surprised by last day. They're just like, oh shit, I'm blinking. It's like, if you only have 21 years to live, wouldn't you be marking that occasion? Wouldn't you be looking forward to that for a year? It's like, okay, this is my last year. I'm be sure to pack in all the fun I can in this last year.
Yeah, that seems like something that would be, people would obsess about.
Yes, but no, they don't. And then the other thing I was thinking is, if you're in charge of population control and compliance, rather than hunting people down with painful weapons, why not lure them into sybaritic pleasure centers for their final week? You check in a week before your last day, and you know when that is because you have a calendar. And they start giving you drugs and amazing food and sex partners, and they already have those in abundance anyway. Yep. But whatever
Yeah, all of those things are readily available anyway.
I guess. Yeah.
So this is a society that has very few people have jobs. In fact, one of the characters talks about the fact she has a job that she hated. And the question is, why did you do it? Because it was a job, because I could actually do something.
And she's working 3 hours a day, 3 days a week.
Yeah.
There's very little meaning in this book for the population. And I don't know, I didn't read on, but there's a reference to the fact that the society is collapsing because there are no old people, because young people don't build. Young people don't look to the future, and young people are not going to be able to maintain this society the way that it needs to be maintained. Yeah.
just before we move on, the description of the Sandman guns. And again, in my mind, I see the movie version of this, so I was a little bit taken aback revisiting this. But they are big pearl-handled revolvers, and they're six-shooters. And the standard pack is six custom projectiles. There's Tangler, Ripper, Needler, Nitro, Vapor, and Homer.
Yeah.
So in a little bit, this reminded me of Judge Dredd, the Sylvester Stallone one. When it'd say to the gun, double whammy, and it goes double whammy. But
it's interesting. They don't talk about the mechanism of the six-shooter, just it has these six different loads, but apparently you can select whatever load you want to fire at any time. You don't have to work your way through them.
Yeah, he flips at one point. They're fighting cubs, and he flips to Vapor and shoots it. So you're able to select it somehow. But we also know that if you take the cylinder out, they do have an energy discharge because he uses that to light a fire later in the book when he and Jessica are on the run.
Yeah.
If they're on the run. And this is the thing. Logan does not actually intend to run. His whole plan, when he realizes he's on last day, is to find sanctuary and sell it out to the Sandmen in exchange for more life. He wants to crush the movement.
Interesting. I forgot. Did he want us to? I thought he just wanted to make the most of his last day, and he was so indoctrinated that he just wanted to sort of go out with a bang by accomplishing a lot in his last day.
He is unclear in his own self, I think, about what his motives are.
I think that's fair.
I think he starts to run, and he justifies his running by thinking, I'm going to sell them out. Yes. But he actually comes back around to that at the end when they encounter Ballard in Washington. He's actually paralyzed by the internal struggle of, wait, what am I here for? Am I here to run, or am I here to bring them down?
Yes. Yeah, I think, and that's another thing they lost in the movie, and I think that works. It's cleaner in the movie that he just freaks out and wants to run as opposed to this weird moral dilemma. The moral dilemma was not working really well for me. And again, maybe it's because I have the movie so firmly embedded in my mind, but I found it unconvincing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, his entire life, the majority of his life has been hunting down runners, right? Yeah. He is steeped beyond most people in this idea that 21 is enough and more than 21 is bad. Yeah. And I love the fact there was an alarm in his gun when his flower went black. Yes. And the gun started, an alarm went off. Yeah. Wild gun, the thing that DS feared most of all. Yeah. A gun in the hands of the runner. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see, I mean, it's credible that you would have this dilemma. You're so invested in a system that you have murdered people to enforce it. It's very hard to go against that when it's your turn, because that just makes you then, if you think that you have a right to run, that just makes you a straight up murderer then. Yeah. So it's tough, but I don't remember them dwelling on that in the book. His mental process was very murky to me.
They didn't spend a whole lot of time on it, but he did revisit that 2 or 3 times, half page or page each visit. But
So what did you think of, spoiler alert, what did you think of the big reveal that Ballard is Francis, or Francis is Ballard?
And, when we started into this is a part of the book that always has bothered me. And I remembered this part of the book bothering me because somehow his face transforms, right? Logan has chosen his side. He's chosen the side of the runners, and he's put himself between Francis and Jessica, who's fleeing for the spaceship. Yeah. Which I've got some issues with. And he's just collapsed from exhaustion and fatigue and mental stress and whatnot. And he's trying to explain himself to Francis. And Francis just somehow morphs into Ballard. And, so Logan's delirious and he might be hallucinating a little bit and whatever. But somehow or another, you've got a legend of a Sandman transforming into a different face, that includes gray hair, of a 42-year-old man. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they've got some sort of technology in the future that lets him do that, but they never talk about it.
Structurally, I think it's brilliant. Where there's, you have Logan, you have Jessica, your main characters, and they're the ones that are on the run, and they're fleeing this nameless but feared adversary, Francis, and pursuing this sort of, not nameless, faceless but feared adversary. and they're pursuing this guy Ballard, who's the ultimate, ultimate runner. So they have these two sort of mythic figures, and then they turn out to be the same guy. That's amazing. That should be an incredible reveal. But it's not.
Yeah,
it's
and
like, what?
They set it up just a little bit, and I mean just a little bit, right? We get a snatch of conversation. The shift is over, and Logan wants to go out and party, and Francis never goes out and party. And the question is, what does Francis do in his spare time?
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all of the setup we get, that maybe Francis has another agenda.
Yeah. It also seems like a pretty high risk occupation for someone who's discovered that they are relatively immortal. I mean, in a world where people live to be 21 and you're going to live to be 80, that's 4 lifetimes you're toying with, not just the one. And it seems like you want to be more careful with your life, more reckless.
Yeah, and while being a Sandman might put you in an ideal position to find runners, he was legendary for the number that he had gunned down. Presumably there's evidence of this gunning down process. Yeah. So is he homering people who he could be helping just to preserve his identity, his cover, so he can help a few others on the side?
That's pretty grim.
Yeah.
That's pretty grim when you consider how awful a homer is, to do that to people knowing that you're maintaining sanctuary, that you're facilitating it, but yet this person's in my way. So, oof.
Yep.
Yeah, bad news.
But they give him an age. In the book, when Logan encounters him, he's 42. He's literally lived a double lifetime.
Yeah.
And it's due to a malfunctioning palm flower or life flower, right? It just never started blinking. It always stayed red.
Yeah.
So sometime between when he turned 14 and the age of 42, right, that gives us 30-ish years to work with, he has identified the spots which would be safe to set up way stations, identified people who he could plant at those way stations to facilitate runners, set up an underground railroad, gotten a space center back on its feet, re-engineered spaceships and space flight, gotten them to a space station that's been abandoned for close to a century at that point, or over a century at that point.
Yeah, Argos is in Mars orbit.
Yes.
So that's like, what, 2 years away, right? Maybe they have faster space.
We don't know how, they talk about the evolution, right? We went to inner space. We tried to go to outer space. It was too far. We gave up.
Yeah.
So we don't know what advances were made, how quickly they get to Argos. But still, it's got to be a complicated thing to pilot a spaceship to Mars, right?
Yeah, you would think. Also, I mean, just with our level of technology today, you couldn't take off on a Mars mission without every government in the world knowing about it. Yeah, you can't keep that kind of thing a secret.
Yeah, but I mean, there are no governments anymore. There's only the thinker.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to watch the skies because there's nothing in the skies. If it would know if there were stuff in the skies because it would belong to it, right?
Yeah.
I'm really trying to suspend my disbelief here. A little thing that I really loved, and I don't know that I've ever noticed this before, the chapter numbers run in reverse.
That was interesting. That was very confusing to me because the Kindle editions often have a lot of problems. If it's a printed book, you can trust it. But if it's a Kindle edition, you're like, oh, what is wrong with the OCR, the stupid Kindle edition?
Yep.
Yeah.
When I first started reading and noticed chapter 10, I was like, wait, is this right? But then I remembered it is starting correctly, or this is how I remember it starting. So, and then the chapters count down, which is pretty cool because there's no doubt in your mind how much book is left.
Exactly. Yeah, I do like that. We haven't talked about road marks on this podcast yet. That's another Zelazny book. I don't know if you've read that.
Doesn't sound familiar, no.
We might do it at one point. That's a favorite book of mine. It starts with chapter 2. The next chapter is chapter 1, and then the next chapter is chapter 2. It just alternates back and forth between 1 and 2. Yeah, I like it. I like the countdown. It's very cool. Oh, here's the thing, and let me throw this again at you, since it's your favorite book, or one of your favorite books. At one point, in order to get past someone who's in their way, Logan has to take an ounce of flesh off Jessica. It's like, wow, it's either that or we both die. So he does it. That just, wow. One, horrible. Two, it just seemed completely implausible. They just like, okay, once he decides to do it, he just reaches up and cuts an ounce of flesh off her thigh.
Yep.
And then the next we hear about is like, she's still bleeding from the wound, but that's it. An ounce that's a significant amount of tissue. Yeah. I don't know where you could take an ounce off of someone's leg without it doing serious damage.
Yeah. People, I think, are a little bit more resilient because we have, well, I mean, there are title characters, but they come back for some pretty serious damage very quickly.
Yeah.
Logan gets his back shredded by the mechanical guard eagles at Crazy Horse.
Yep.
By the way, mechanical guard eagles. That was cool. I liked that a lot, and I could see that appealing to 12-year-old me.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, over and over again, they take implausible amounts of damage, and then, a few pages later, they're functioning again. They don't freeze to death on the North Pole naked.
Yeah. I guess, so I have two issues with it. And one, it doesn't seem to have enough weight. One, in terms of the damage that it does to Jessica, which makes it seem just like a cool throwaway thing. I'm just going to cut an ounce of flesh off this woman. And two, in terms of the moral dilemma of taking a knife to another human being and cutting away an ounce of flesh. I mean, Shakespeare makes a lot of this in Merchant of Venice. It's a pound of flesh there.
Right.
But he's just like, okay. He doesn't worry about, okay, if I, does the blood count towards the quota? Where can I do it where I can do the least damage? What is Jessica going to experience while I'm doing this? Where is it going to cause the least pain and suffering to her, especially going forward? Nope. He's just like, he thinks about it. He says, okay. And he does it. Yeah. And that's it.
Yeah.
And we're over.
Well, he is very pragmatic, right? And he's, again, his Sandman training, he's almost a machine, right? And he's trying to be that machine.
Yeah.
There's time and again, where he just is completely immobile despite the fact he's in very uncomfortable circumstances. We get 3 or 4 instances of that, along the road. So it's got to be done. He does it. 'Twere done. 'Twere best done quickly, right?
I guess this is as dystopias go, we've read a lot of dystopias. This one's pretty bad. I would not want to live in this world.
Well, again, all of your needs are met. All of your desires can be met. It's simply up to you to really have a good time until your last day. And what's the payoff? You go to sleep.
Yeah. But you live your first 7 years. I mean, there's no families. Family units have been destroyed. So,
which was weird to me that they have the concept of family still.
Yes.
Right. This society has been running for well over a century. Maybe 2 centuries. I forget what the number. They give us dates, and I've lost them. But long enough that nobody has known their mother, their father, their sister, their brother.
Yeah.
Ever in the living memory of mankind, it's not there. How do they have this idea still?
I don't know. Maybe that's his point. Maybe it's an inherent human need.
Well, we never talk about how they procreate. Right. So, I mean, maybe it's still the old-fashioned way. Maybe women still get pregnant, carry a baby around for 9 months, and then when they deliver it, it's taken off to nursery. So maybe
that wasn't my impression.
You never see a pregnant person, but they don't talk about it. I mean, in Brave New World, we spend a lot of time.
That's 5% of your allotted lifespan, Who's going to do that? Yeah.
So sex ed would not be on the... you don't want people knowing how to avoid it because you don't want the race to die out.
In the movie, and I didn't watch the movie again, but I did watch a clip of it, trying to decide whether I wanted to watch it, and the answer was no, based on this clip. It looks pretty bad. But Logan in the movie is Logan 5, and he's looking at a new baby, which is called Logan 6. And it's like, this is clearly a clone. Yeah, they have cloned him, so it's his offspring. And I think it's just a straight clone, and that's the naming convention. So I think that's where the babies come from. And then they're raised in a basically a creche. And then, they're just taken care of until they're 7. They're booted out in the world, and they become essentially Cub Scouts, wild roving bands of little monsters until they become adults at 15. Yeah, 14.
14.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nightmare world.
From 14 to 21, you're a citizen. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, it worked for a while. Worked for a good while.
For certain values of work. Yeah. All right. So you said you read on. You went on to read the next book and then the third book too?
Well, at the moment, I'm in the middle of the second book, and I don't think I've ever read the third book.
Interesting.
But yeah, the second book is not at all. I don't remember much at all from what I'm reading. But again, I definitely know I read the first one over and over again, and it was one of those that the cover was folded back and crinkled, and the artwork was distressed. I don't think I ever read the third. The second, well, I don't want to spoil this if you're.
I'm not going to read it. You can spoil it. Spoil away.
So they make it. Jessica and Logan make it to Argos, and they have a son, and they're happy there for 4 years, and then the ships stop coming. So they hold out for 6 years with a dwindling population. Argos had gotten up to something like 3,000 people.
Wow.
And then the ships stopped coming. Argos is not self-sufficient. So they hold out for 6 years until there's only a couple of hundred left, and they finally scrape together the resources to send a rocket back. And they can only send like 20 people back. Well, of course, Jessica, Logan, and their son happen to be on that rocket.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out the Sandmen did crash the Underground Railroad. They destroyed the Space Center. They killed Ballard. That's why the rockets stopped coming. Or they destroyed the Space Center. Ballard was going to get caught, and he sacrificed himself to destroy the Thinker.
So the Thinker's gone.
The Thinker's gone. Society crumbles overnight, instantly, not even overnight, in a moment. All the lights go off.
Yeah.
All the air conditioning stops working. All the food processors stop working. All the infants in their cribs in the nursery die.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some really lovely, horrible graphic stuff that he talks about just in terms of the bones of the society. But Logan comes back to find a world that has been 6 years after that crash. His son gets immediately sick because he has none of the natural immunities. And Logan tries to infiltrate a city to find the medicine that will make his son better, leaving Jessica and the ill son alone, and hijinks ensue.
Okay, so I'm not going to read it. One of the things about the first book is I really don't like the writing style, but I got to say, in terms of structure, that's a great follow-up. You could see, like, the first Hunger Games book was amazing, and the second Hunger Games book was the first Hunger Games book again, and this is not that. No. This is really taking the world that you've built and exploring the further consequences of it. And I love in a sequel when you build up this incredible edifice, and in book 2 you just like bring it to the ground and deal with the consequences of that. That's amazing. Yeah. So
it's his survival, his hunter skills are now his survival skills.
Yeah.
And anyway, bad things happen. He's out for vengeance. I don't remember how it ends, but I'll find out in a couple of days.
Yeah. All right. Interesting.
Yep. These are quick reads.
Yeah.
They're not lengthy, and they're not hard to read by any stretch of the imagination.
They are. I found it a little bit challenging to read, again, because of the writing style. The writing style really grates on my nerves. And this is a very particular thing. But he has a tendency to lean into, I would say, poetry. It's not poetry, but to lean into poetry rather than making things explicit. So I find myself having to go back and reread something to find out what had actually happened, because he would say something in the most oblique way possible. And then it's like, oh, he's saying that guy stepped out of the shadows. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's a style thing that just doesn't work for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember noticing it, but again, this is an old friend to me. I remembered a lot of the passages. I remembered some of the language.
Yeah.
So I was surprised how much of it did come back as I was going through. There were a few surprises for me, other than the fact there were no surprises.
That's amazing. That's why we reread books, right?
Yeah.
That's why we have favorites. Yeah. The other thing that's striking about this book to me is that it is, and this is obviously based on when it was written, it's the thing that is the worst crisis that is facing our world is overpopulation. And this was the thing. This is the thing we were all afraid about growing up. It's like, oh my God, there's going to be so many people in the world, and we're going to run out of food, we're going to run out of land, we're going to run out of resources. And now, of course, 50 years later, we haven't reached peak population yet, but we have declining populations in every civilized country in the world. The only reason the population numbers are staying up is because we're importing huge numbers of immigrants. And in the countries that are providing those immigrants, population eventually going to peak and go down there. So we're very, very close to peak population for the world. It looks like overpopulation is not going to be our issue. 20 years from now, it's going to be underpopulation. Yeah, so
Yeah, well,
crazy to think about.
there were changes that happened that, of course, couldn't have been foreseen. You know,
Yes.
changes in agricultural science in particular that bumped the cap of what we thought the world could support considerably.
Yes. Yeah, that always bothered me. The overpopulation people would draw a line and say, if this goes on, it's like, but it won't. Nothing does. Nothing just goes linear like that to infinity. That's not how anything works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a solution. I was about to say a good solution. No, this is a solution.
Yeah.
And I love the fact they talk about the Little War, and it was, the only violence happened in Washington, D.C., and then after that, the youth just were like, we're in charge now, and all the old people were kind of like, okay, we're fine with that. And then they found themselves retired, retired having a slightly more ominous meaning now.
Yes.
Yeah. But again, it wasn't murders. They set up the sleep centers. It was humane in as much as people didn't want to go, but
Did you see Soylent Green?
several times.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
a cherished movie.
So it reminds me a lot of Soylent Green because they did the same thing. They give you, they bring you to the, and it's not enforced at a certain age. It's just strongly encouraged once you get to be old because you're pretty much taking up space.
Whenever you want to,
Yeah.
they are there. They're open 24 hours a day,
Yes.
right? And you can have,
Yeah.
whatever viewing you want, whatever music you want.
Yeah.
They want you to be happy and comfortable and food.
Yes, yes. They were going to turn you into food.
It's people. I'm going to have to go and watch that tonight. Oh, another thing, and I remember lamenting this. There is a anthem, I guess, to the Sandmen. And we only get 2 verses of it, but we're told that there are 103 of them. I would so love to see the 103 verses. I think that would be a cool thing. Angerman was filled with fury, he the judge and he the jury. Gunning runner, gunning with the quarry from him running, Homer in the gun. I don't have to do both verses, but there's something about that, knowing that refrain is out there, right? And the esprit de corps of the Sandmen, taking pride in their work, and the citizens around them taking pride in them. Runners are despised. I almost said hunters are despised. Runners are despised in that society.
So I thought I thought the movie did a lot of good things in adapting to being a movie. And one of the things they did was they added, rather than just going to the sleep center, they added the carousel. I thought that was brilliant.
I thought carousel was kind of a weird thing.
Carousel was weird. And actually it was weird in the movie too. But what it did functionally was you don't just go in on your last day and give up. You go and you participate in a lottery, and maybe you'll win, and you'll get to live forever and do a whole thing. And it was like
reborn.
Woo. Yeah.
Yep.
And one of the things that prompts Logan to run in the movie is he finds out that the carousel is just a lie. Nobody wins.
Well, he asks Francis, do you know anybody that's been reborn? Because it seems statistically likely that if you ask enough people, you would find somebody that had been.
Yeah.
And but of course Francis is having none of it.
Anything else?
I really enjoyed revisiting this, and it held up so much better than I thought it would. Not all of these early childhood or young person rereads have held up well, but this one,
Fair enough.
This one, I
yes.
think, it continued to satisfy me.
Yeah. Good.
All right, so what are we looking at next?
Next, we're going to do some nonfiction. Our first time doing nonfiction on the podcast. And this is a book called Masters of Doom, about the early days of id Software.
Well, I certainly played enough Doom. I feel like I'm authority on that already.
I have not played a lot of Doom, but for me, it's just the memory of a magical time in PCs where the whole system was comprehensible and people who were just getting started could do amazing things. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.